Today we're going to go through a game that I played this morning, and it's not a big game that breaks any records, but it's a very useful game to grasp some of the things I try to convey to the people who are trying to get over to the 2000 rating mark. So the game starts with e4, and well, you can expect that. A lot of games start with e4, then standard e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. That's the Italian game. Now, we're not here to discuss opening play. We're just here to look at two things. The first thing we'll be looking at in this game is moves that compromise your position. And the second thing we'll be looking at is players who give away free stuff. Because you see, in a game of chess, it doesn't matter how brilliantly you've played up to that point. If you give away material that loses, then you've done everything else that you've done before. So let's proceed with the game. Bishop d6. Usually in this position, people play, I would say some of them play this, others play this one, knight f6. Each of those moves have a sort of a typical type of game associated with it. But here, bishop d6 is, it blocks the pawn on d7 here. And of course, if the pawn on d7 is blocked, then this bishop cannot come out. Basically, bishop d6 is not a very clever idea in this position. It is played in some openings, but the idea of bishop d6 would be to push that pawn here and then to withdraw the bishop back and then to push the pawn on d5. That's what normally happens. But here, bishop d6 is not compatible with knight c6 because you're basically preventing a plan that involves pushing here, bringing the bishop back and playing d5. So how is white going to deal with this? Well, castle. Now, one of the rules that I follow when playing chess is when your opponent makes bad moves, do not do anything that's going to sway him away from that. Do not create any kind of complications or tactical diversion that he may be able to follow. Just as he digs his grave, let him dig. Do not assist him. So this is why I just castle and, show me what you do next. He plays a good move. I play my rook here to defend. There's many ways to do it. You could do it with the knight here, or you could push the pawn forward. All ideas have merit. I tend to play moves like that because in some variation, when the knight attacks the bishop can withdraw here, which is a good square. So that was my preference. Castle, which is a good move. c3. Of course, what I didn't want to do in this position is to play here, which would sort of kind of justify the fact that he's put his bishop on this diagonal. You don't want to do that. Although d4, by the way, is perfectly playable, but he would probably play rook e8 to defend, and there's not much white has gained in this position. Okay, so I play c3 first, and as I told you, he plays his knight here, and I just withdraw. Now this knight is on the edge of the board, and it can be potentially attacked with b4. Perhaps not now, but it's not a very useful knight because it has no scope. Cannot come here, cannot come here. It can only go back from where it came from. So he plays c5. So his attempt at his plan when he played this is to play the pawn here, go back there, and perhaps next he would be able to do that and play d5. But let's see what happened. Now I crack the center open. The immediate threat is to take here and fork these two pieces, therefore winning material. So he plays the queen in support. Now what this does, which is not immediately obvious, but what it does, it allows me to swap my knight here for his bishop here. And once the bishop, which is controlling the dark squares of black's position, is gone, you immediately develop dark square weaknesses. That may not mean a lot to some people, but when you look at the continuation, you realize that in actual fact it makes the black position very uncomfortable. Like this, and now I have 4. So what's going to happen is this knight is going to be hit by the pawn e5, and it's not going to have many places to go. But importantly enough, the pawn on e5 is kind of acting on this square and preventing the pawn from moving, at least in the short term. So the queen withdraws to, there are other ways to play that. He could have gone to e6. I think it's just a matter of style, because I would have followed up with this anyway. So after f4, queen to c7, e5 as planned. And now you can see that these squares, here, there, there, and there, which is anything forward, is not available to the knight. So what does the knight have to do? Withdraw. Now, there are several things in this position that are worth noticing. First, you have a knight on the side of the board. You have a space advantage to white, especially around here. That gives you a spatial advantage. In terms of course, you've got the black squares that I mentioned before. Black has given up the bishop on dark squares, therefore it's likely to be weaker on dark squares later on in the game. The only compensation that black has is the center pawn of white's position is overcommitted, which may in some lines allow for undermining this way or that way, but perhaps not yet. Here there's a good move which indirectly prevents d6 from being moved, because after d6, it's kind of like white is losing its advantage. So this move, knight to a3, threaten knight to b5 if black were to push the pawn here, and so winning a pawn. Here, you can probably get away with pushing d6, but it gets a bit messy. But it's certainly an idea to actually play here, and then you got that. Then you got to move here, and then it gets a little bit messy. But I suggest that the idea for black is to allow the pawn from being taken, and then kick the knight with this move. And when the knight withdraws, you take on d6. It's not clear, but I think in this position white is better because of this move. That just plays right on the theme of the knight on the side of the board that doesn't have many square to go. So, I mean, this would be a game by itself to analyze. But after knight a3, he played queen to b6, which I followed up with a simple move. Don't get into trouble. Don't allow discoveries. Don't mess with the opponent. Just when you have threats, potential threat like this alongside the diagonal, you can play, even though there's no immediate threat, even though playing forward would not do anything harmful to white. I think a prophylactic move like king in the corner is probably a good idea. Now this is a mistake, and why? In fact, it's a very big mistake, because the role of that knight was to keep an eye on d6 so that the pawn could be pushed, and then the bishop could get out somehow. But by playing this move here, he has forfeited the control of this square. And so the combination of this pawn sealing the square and the bishop on dark square missing from black's position makes his position actually quite difficult to play now. And objectively, it's probably lost at this point, just after this move, knight to c7. So on with the game. Just that. This is probably more of a psychological move than anything else. Probably objectively you can actually give up this pawn, but in my case I just decided to defend. It's in keeping with my way of playing, which is do not give your opponent counterplay if you can afford not to. That's a lesson worth remembering. Rook here. It's hard to see what he's trying to do. I mean, how he's going to get out of the pickle that he's in. Now, just before. And so what we have here is the targeting of that knight that was on the edge of the board. That knight was always at some point going to be a target. So what does he do? Well, we draw the knight. Then I'm able to get in. This is a double whammy. Well, it's a triple whammy. First, it seals that square further. It attacks the queen, so it does so with a gain of tempo. But in addition to that, the queen doesn't have any good square to retreat to. So the queen, whether it goes here or there, it would be potentially exposed to the knight moving and attacking the queen. So queen a6, and here, once again, I prevent counterplay. I'm not interested in playing things like b5 and then he takes here, and you got to calculate the tactics. I have a saying, which is, let your opponent marinate in his own juices. It sounds a bit funny, but there's a lot of truth to it. So here, I just played a3, and you let him face the problem. How is he going to deal with the fact that this knight's going to jump here and expose the queen to an attack from that bishop here? Good question. So he plays b5, which is virtually forced. But then I'll just jump into d6. Rook e6. And I'll just take the pawn. There's probably a better move. Once again, you could push moves like f5 onto the rook and create all sorts of complication. Why would you want to do that? What would you want to potentially give your opponent some counterplay? I just took here. on c5. And what does he do? You can see from this position that there's a lot going on dark squares, and he's sadly he's missing his bishop on dark squares that he's given up in the opening. So I'll just take the pawn. The idea being, if the queen withdraws something, later I can play bishop e6. At the moment, I'm happy to stay as it is because he has no way of attacking the pawn on c5 because he moved the rook on the square where the knight could have gone, attacking here. So onto the game, f6, which was his idea. I took here. There are different. Look, in a position like this, white has got such an advantage. There's many ways you can do things, but I decided to do it this way. He took, bishop takes. Now, thinking that if bishop goes here, he's going to take my rook here. But unfortunately for him, there's just a simple move that takes care of everything. It's just queen c2. Now I'm threatening bishop here, either attacking the rook, or if the rook withdraws, we check, picking up the queen. So it doesn't have a lot here. a6 is, I call that a non-move. It just doesn't do anything useful because I was going to go to c4 anyway. The queen has to get out of the way, and now it gets slightly worse for him. f5. And bishop is not too good. It gives targets to potential targets to white here, and you don't want to do that when your position is already compromised. Here, well, I could have taken on f6 first. It's just a matter of style, but I think objectively taking here is a better move, because of course he can't take here because he's pinned to the king. So I took here, and then I took on f6 next, which is just a different move order. And after that, of course, this is the part about the free stuff. Don't give free stuff to your opponent, because now I just take here, and when the queen moves, I take there. And so now I'm finding myself two bishops up with pawn advantages and all kinds of things. It's just not looking good for him. Rook here, I take. Now, rook, in this position, it's overwhelming. And when he plays rook f8, there's actually false mate on the board. Rook takes, and here, a good move would be rook e7, and as you can see, there's no tricks of him taking like that, because threatening to mate on f1 because the bishop is defending. If this take, rook cannot checkmate because the bishop takes. So rook f8, rook e6, and in this position before he actually played king h8, he lost on time. But I'll just play through the variation. That's the most obvious. He's got the threat is mate in one here. The threat is pawn takes checkmate. So he's going to have to take this. The pawn is going to take on an e7. The rook is going to go here, and then you play a move like on the f file here or there, and that's the end of it. Because if he's got to make an escape for the king, then queen here check, takes, take, promote into a queen, king a7, and then we're going to do, how do you mate here? Just like that. And the next move you play queen to g8. he makes any move and queen to g8 here will checkmate. So that was an interesting game. It's probably not the best game you've seen, but it certainly holds a lot of lessons.